what are you looking for exactly in a partner? What would you need them to do on their side?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to do my whole class, which will be about 28 students, or just about 5 or 6, but I'd love to get 5 or 6 education students somewhere outside the U.S., obviously, and have them collaborate on a project. There would probably be about 4 or 5 sessions, the normal way I don't know if there's a normal way people do COIL, but, introductions and get them to know each other and then solve a problem for their particular country. All get together and talk about their philosophies of education and then solve a problem in education. We'd have to hammer that out, but that's kind of what I'm looking at for this spring is a pilot program.
Yeah. That sounds really interesting. Let me come back to that because I have an idea for you. I just want to bring Nicole in here. She doesn't have a microphone, but she, as you can see here, she's introducing herself, and she's the senior lecturer in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences and teaches composition and literature courses. And Nicole's formerly the assistant director of undergraduate education. So great.
I'll speak a little for Nicole or about her. She teaches a lot of lower division courses, and it would be just the most engaging way to start bringing our first year students into an engagement with a bigger world if we could find ways for them to link up with students in another space doing composition and literature.
Right. Oh, good. And somebody else just, I heard them signing in. So whoever that was, if you want to go ahead and open up your chat box and say hello, that would be great. We're just kind of beginning introductions here before we get started, waiting for a couple more people. So both for Scott and Nicole, one resource that I think is going to be a really useful resource, and hopefully we'll have a couple more people from that group with us this morning, is what I think I mentioned to you, Scott, once before we were just getting going, was this Fulbright collaborative workshop, and it's a Facebook group of called the Fulbright Collaborative, and some of them were Fulbright people and some of them were not. But there's people there interested in doing collaborations, and there's one in particular that might be interesting either to Nicole or if she's ready, and Scott is in. There's a person, Tham, her first name is Tham Dong, in Vietnam, and she has a class of English students who are really interested in getting started in January, if that's your time frame. They could start as early as that, and they're English. It's an English teaching class, but it sounds like English is pretty strong, and that might be a potential connection for you, and we can talk more about that after we get off.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. Absolutely. Great.
And same with Nicole, if I don't know what what your time frame is for looking, but for everyone, this is I think it's going to be a valuable resource where you can connect up. And I think I'm going to be connecting with someone from the Philippines in January and doing a course that I got through this connection. So I just want to also bring in Christy Strauss. She just signed in, and Christy teaches environmental studies at University of Washington also, and is planning an online course with colleagues in Beijing. Fantastic, Christy. That's great. And Christy, if you have a audio capacity, you can click that on now and video. Go ahead and do it. If not, why don't you just put in your chat box here what the topic is going to be, or what's the content just briefly might be with your partner in Beijing.
Sure. Do you see me?
Oh, there you go. Hey.
And you can hear me.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So I teach an environmental sustainability class, actually a broad sustainability class here at the University of Washington. It's a 200 level class. Mm-hmm. And we are going to do what we're calling a international extended flipped classroom. So the students will have shared online space and complete some of the same assignments. And then the students from Beijing will come here in October, and we're still putting together our course study abroad plan, but we are hopeful that our students will go there in December. So this is fall 2017.
Okay. So you'll start.
Can I ask a question there? Can you clarify what a flipped class is in that context?
Sure. So just generally generally a flipped classroom is that more of the lecture type material is online, and then in the classroom, students are engaging in collaborative learning activities.
Okay.
So in this case, we're going to have two different, so that's just our name for it. We'll see how realistic it is, but they're not going to be the same class. So the students won't be watching and observing, interacting with all of the same content. So the class in Beijing and the class at UW Seattle are similar. They're both going to focus on broad sustainability and on sustainability in their local place, as well as on personal contributions to sustainability. What choices do we make that matter? So then the students will have this shared space where they'll be comparing, the answers in Beijing and the answers in Seattle.
Christy, can you tell us what that shared space will be?
I can't. That's what I'm hoping to learn more about.
Sure. So, also, will you, in your course, will you have some synchronous activity that will take place, or will it all be in different time zones, asynchronous?
Given the time zones, the current plan is asynchronous, but we're potentially will have like a 1 hour at two different times, sort of like a meet and greet that would happen early in the morning here and late at night there. Right. So it certainly can't be a big part of our class. Right.
Okay, yeah. Sounds good. I'm just going to check to see if there's any. Okay, and Nicole just said, Christy, that sounded really great.
Awesome. I can see that too.
Okay, good. So I think given the time, we may get a couple more people, 2 or 3 more people that are going to join us. And I think because of who's on right now, I'm going to switch things up a little bit, because I was going to start with, and maybe I'll do this very quickly, an overview. But each of you, I think, have a little bit of familiarity with, some of you extensive, like Colleen, and others have had some relationship to COIL. So let me briefly just give an overview of COIL, and then what we may do, if this is our core group, is we may get into some more specifics about different methods that I can share with you, some of the methods I've used, both synchronous and asynchronous, talk about some lessons learned. We can just do a lot more interactive here about what you're thinking about, and kind of do some brainstorming about some possible solutions. And then I'll show you some resources that you can use in addition to that. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Great.
Okay. All right. So let's kind of walk through a few things here about COIL. And I'm using COIL as the short for Collaborative Online International Learning. That's the label that we've given it. Sort of like, what did you call it, Christy? The project?
Yeah, International Extended Flipped Classroom.
Flipped Classroom. Okay, got it.
But I like the COIL, the Collaborative Online International Learning is absolutely what we are trying to do.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'll talk a little bit about the definition about that, and then get into the technology tools, and I'll tell you some of the basic ones that we've been using. And there's a whole range of them, but I really try and keep it pretty simple, and then get into it. And this is where I think, instead of me talking, I think we'll start with what are some of the issues you're thinking about, and I'll come in where I can with sharing ideas. I've done about a dozen of these courses now at the university level, or will by the end of this the school year. And it's really ranged from, I've worked a lot in the Middle East and India, so I've done a lot across time zones, doing what you're facing with China, with 13.5 or 15-hour differences, and finding some ways to make that work. And I do like working with communities that tend to be pretty different from communities that our students would normally come in contact with. And also the places where we have the most misunderstanding. So a lot of working with countries in the Middle East. And then we'll talk a little bit about potential partners. And we started getting into this as people were coming on, and where you can find them and what to do as you're developing these initial relationships. And then we'll end with some resources and I'll kind of walk through with them, ones that you can use. And Colleen may have others, and those of you that have been doing this work may have others too to put in. So as I said, I've worked a lot in the Middle East and in India, and I just got back this last year from 6 months working in India. This is on the Ganges River. This was not my classroom. Really having a chance to work on that side of the partnership, and then work with teachers throughout India, faculty, on, what are their students facing and what do they get out of this? Because oftentimes it's really different. And for example, my students in India that I was working with there, they were saying, hey, this is just a really good opportunity for us to practice English. We love, being able to talk about social issues and contemporary issues and get in that, but we can practice leadership skills by talking in front of a native speaking English audience and get into some real depth on these issues. And so we see that as leadership and practicing in front of a public audience and an international audience, our English. So it is different in different places that you go. And one thing I think about conceptually is that we have this potential to develop a global brain. That's what we're trying to do, like take the intellectual content of people from around the world and share it and discuss it. But we can do that now, and I think the thing that we can add, and you can do that just by Googling. You get on and you have access to all the information in the world, essentially. But what you don't have is human experience with that, and how humans then use that information and think about it differently. And so that's when we start getting into cross-cultural skills, and how do you get to not just the head but the heart by this virtual means, and what are the ways that we can use it effectively. And that, to me, when I started this 10 years ago, was the key. Was, yeah, we can connect, but can we really have life-altering experiences through these kinds of courses? And I've concluded without a doubt that people can change, just like it happens when you travel abroad. You can have students, if we do this well, really have life-altering experiences where they see themselves and others differently. So let me just stop for a second. Is everyone hearing me okay? And is the pace of this all right? Or any problems?
It's great.
Sure. Yes. Good.
Okay. So it's collaborative. So I do like, I think Christy was kind of talking, and how others think about this. You're collaborating with your students in their own classroom. So they're working in small teams, but they're also collaborating globally. And Scott was talking about this, about having them work in a global team on a problem. In both, you could work in both areas. And so it really is, students are learning, how do I work with each other? How do I develop, how do I understand what the skill set is that I have and what others had, and how do I bring that out? So a lot of group work. And it's virtual then. You got the group work that's happening in your classroom, and then you have it working across cultures. And I'll just say something about that this notion of, I think, breaking down into small teams, and I think Christy was alluding to this too, this idea of having people not just work one-to-one, which is one way you can do it. I think that can be useful, but also not whole classroom to whole classroom, but get students working in these small teams, I find to be the most effective thing. It's a management issue then for you as a faculty member. How do I manage these small teams? But in terms of the learning experience, it tends to be, I find, really valuable. And then, of course, it's international. There are ways in which you can do these kind of courses and work with very different communities within the U.S., for example, and do it virtually and collaboratively. And I know some faculty who are thinking of doing that, but the the ones I'm familiar with that I usually am doing are international in scope. And I find that students start coming up with really unique ways of engaging. Oftentimes my classes end up, some by plan, by design, and others spontaneously, and the students will, because they're really connected, they'll start doing things that you would not normally see in a class. Like, here's a class that decided for our closing video conference, we want to put together a dance as a thank you to our Indian compatriots, and it'll be a little bit of a India fusion with the US that a couple of the students led. So here they are dancing for 2 minutes on live video. I mean, I can't get my students to dance in my class, but you know, they were really excited about doing this. And then the Tibetans did the same thing. And to me, the reason that this is so critical that we're doing this is a lot of times you'll see us, people will think, oh yeah, it makes sense for an international studies class. Or Elise, you were talking about, you know, this management class where you're bringing together people who are thinking about international dimensions of their work. But really in the vast majority of businesses now, we're communicating at least 70% of our time virtually. So we need to be understanding how you use these virtual tools well, because we're doing it, but we're oftentimes not doing it well. We're not understanding how to get to the heart of the matter. So that's one thing that students are learning. And it's really a requirement now in businesses across the board, and they're requiring it. And then of course the cross-cultural skills that come into play, because again, businesses are international, whether it's a large one or a small one. Your markets oftentimes are international, and we'll see if that remains. But you know, that's just the way that it's operating. And then the one that many people come into this work for is because not only from a business standpoint, but from a civic standpoint, if we're going to solve the problems, the major problems that face us, like global warming, it's going to be done by understanding our connection with other people. So here's an example of courses that are being taught now that I'm familiar with, and they really cut across all sectors. And that's what I think we're going to start seeing more and more of, is people, not just in international studies, but we're seeing it across the board in health and science and all kinds of fields. So just do a quick check here. Okay. So let me stop for a second and see if on that first part, that quick overview, are there questions or comments, reactions that anyone would like to make?
Greg, I'll just affirm what you were saying in those and add that I think on all of our campuses, the idea of a learning outcome being global awareness is true, and yet we haven't found an effective way to do that. I don't think, you know, textbooks necessarily give our students a real sense of the world that is out there and an understanding of it. And COIL seems to be the best option for us to really have our students have an experience that is global and that makes them understand that there are both differences and sameness with students all across the world. Yes. Right.
Yeah, what I find time and again is the students will study the content. Like they were studying, you know, Exodus issues and learning about things like in Tibet, communities that have left the country, you know, are studying immigration. And it's one thing to study that theoretically, but then when you talk to a student who said, yeah, I left Tibet 12 years ago, I escaped through Nepal, and I still can't talk to my family, but I know that they're there, and every once in a while I'm able to get through. I mean, that, you know, that makes it very real to them, and they want to know more. And so they get engaged in the history and understand the dimension through these individual stories that come out. Anything else? Other comments or questions? And if any, those that are online, if you want to put any of the questions in the chat box, I'll try and catch that. And Colleen, maybe you can help me if I miss something that gets dropped in.
Sure.
Thanks. Okay, well, let me go on with a few other things, and we'll start getting into some specifics of the how-tos. So this is a class of students in Egypt that we did a project with. They had to develop a video about a compelling social issue, and the video had to be created by a team of students. So it was very challenging because you had to gather content about the issue from both sides, both in Egypt and the U.S. Take something like women harassment, and then make a 4-minute kind of mini documentary about the issue. I point this out because you were talking, was it you, Christy, talking about doing with China, you know, doing an introductory kind of video? Mm-hmm. That can work if it's fairly structured, I think. And with us, we had here's where 12 students here in Egypt, and we only had 8 at the UW that were connecting, so it was a little bit smaller group, and we were able to do it in almost an interviewing style where you'll see they each had name tags, so you could see names, so you start personalizing the experience instead of, oh, that Egyptian there, you know, it becomes, you know, Dahlia. So little things like that become important, and they help. And then we had some questions that both sides, 3 questions that both sides submitted to each other ahead of time, so they kind of think ahead of time, and then who was going to take the question. So there was a little bit of structure to it, and it made it a little more personalized. So I think large group video conferences can work with some thoughtful structure ahead of time. It does not work, I've found. I've had some real bad ones where we just said, hey, we'll just get on, we'll say hi to each other and, you know, introduce each other. Well, it's terrible, you know. It's tough enough to do that, 2 big groups introducing each other, but, you know, to do it over video, it just kills it. So I learned that quickly. These smaller group video conferences can help, and one of the workarounds that I've found for the time differences is while I can't structure my class that happens at 8:45 to connect with India very easily because they're at 11:30 at night, but if we have a small global team, this is 1 student with a group of 3 connecting with 3 or 4 students, and sometimes they can meet at home, so they can do it at 11 o'clock at night, you know, here, and, you know, 7 in the morning in another place, and because you only have to manage them 3 people, and they get together in someone's home, and then they can have a live video conference, but it's on their time rather than class's time. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I've done with the teachers is, as the faculty members, that they can record it and then either turn in an excerpt to show me, you know, a highlight from it, or just turn it in so I can get a sense of how it went. Mm-hmm. This PowerPoint will be available, so I'm not going to walk through this video tips, but I also will point to you a website where you can see more about this, about how to use video effectively, and how you get good imagery between the two, because that's important. That's one of those little subtle things you think about, like, how's the lighting, you know, and am I, you know, up here looking down, or, you know, looking up, and you have students think about those things when they're doing these video conferences, and you know, how do you connect and get started, and what do you do initially, and, you know, how do you plan an agenda, and those things. So all those become good, I think, learning elements. And then one other thing that we often have students do that I find really useful, and they've kind of gotten into this quicker than what I had planned, which is what's great about these things, is and that is using student-produced videos. So in this case, this is an example where this is the Tibetan students, and they wanted to convey, and they've been doing it in a closed Facebook group, issues about how Tibetans are discriminated against in subtle ways, and comparing that with US, how discrimination occurs. And they were writing about it, but Tenson here said, hey, we're going to we're going to reenact how this happens when you walk into a bank. And they did a little 2-minute video, a vignette, and recorded it, and then put it on, and then put an explanation with it. This is actually a video that they did, and they put it on Facebook. So that's a really nice way, I think, for students to interact. And sometimes you can do introductions that way too, instead of like what we did here, they record a video. Whoops. Whoa. Is that happening? Sorry about that.
Yes, we don't know what's happening.
Let me, I don't know.
Sounds like a train.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to, is that happening on my end? Are you getting it from here?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. All right.
We can hear you. We see the one screen and.
Okay. How's that?
That looks good.
Yeah.
That's good.
God. I think what happened there was there might have been a video connected with that clip. So let's talk now about I've given you a few little scenarios of what we've done, and that last one was about how students can use their own student-produced videos to then put into a Facebook group. And I'll just say those tend to be the two primary tools, well, the three primary tools that I use with students is we do live video conferencing in both small groups and large groups. And we have student-produced videos that they then put on Facebook to share in a closed Facebook group. And then most of the discussions that I have are in closed Facebook groups, where sometimes we use WeChat, but these are the ways in which students discuss. And then the other way I manage that is that in the beginning, I'm looking at all the content. But as the weeks go by, I have students do screenshots of their best posts that demonstrate the kind of communication that we're teaching in the course. And I can go into that a little bit. But, and then they put that in Canvas or whatever tool you're using in your classroom to say, here's my best artifact, my best evidence of this kind of communication that we're doing.
So Greg,
yeah,
I think you just answered the question, but Scott posted, do you tell students which technologies to use, or do they figure it out on their own?
Yeah, well, I do both. I do suggest, hey, why don't you guys use Skype to do the video conference and record it. But if you have another way of doing it and you can still have a live video conference and you want to use another tool, if you want to use Zoom or you want to use through Facebook, use the video there, they can do it. They end up finding other ways to communicate and get the job done. So they will suggest it, but I usually will offer them a standard way to do it so everyone can do it. And if they have an alternative, they can say, hey, here's a way we can do it that we think could be better.
From my point of view and the few experiences we've had at UWT, it's very comforting to the students to have the guidelines, right? You're going to use a Facebook closed group because we know that both countries can use Facebook, or you're going to use a Google Doc because we know both countries can do that. But then once they get into the small group, I mean, for their deliverables, they're students and they want those guidelines, where they want those rubrics. But then indeed, for them to get it done, if they want to explore the boundaries. But for the most part, I think our experiences have been the students want to know what's expected of them.
Right. I'd say that too.
Can I chime in on another question there too? That's similar. So you're talking about various venues to use. And I guess I'm thinking about confidentiality. I work a lot with LGBTQ communities in my own research, and mainly in Sweden, but Western Europe, and it is still very dangerous work for people in, where Moldova, Armenia. So when I hear Facebook and I hear you say it's a closed group, do you delete it afterwards? I think that would still be a precarious venue for some people. Is there is Skype or is Zoom? I haven't actually used Zoom. Is it more, I don't know. Facebook's privacy policies are pretty interesting, so I would want to stay away from that in general with controversial work. But is Zoom have better privacy policies?
Colleen, do you have any thought on that?
I think, if I remember, we did check on the privacy policies of Zoom just to create it as a UW supported site. Mm-hmm. And the agreement at UW is that we are if you used our Zoom and let them connect the way Greg is doing here, it really is stored in a UW protected space.
Oh, wow. So, okay, that's great.
That's a possibility for Zoom. But the difference, of course, is the hard choices are, as Greg was saying, asynchronous or synchronous. So Zoom is great if you're going to be able to connect people, right? And Facebook closed group, if the students already use Facebook and are comfortable with it, is asynchronous, mm-hmm. and by invitation only. And I certainly understand the concerns when the content and material is in any way sensitive, mm-hmm. But I think if students are already using Facebook, they're very comforted in some ways by the fact that it's a closed group and you can go into it only by invitation, mm-hmm. acceptance there. And then you have to figure out your sensitive material. The likelihood is very slim that Facebook will be willing to turn over your course materials to a foreign government, but hard.
Yeah.
I'd add one thing to this that I think is a caveat that should be said anytime we're working in countries that are risky, including our own, is that regardless, and I'll give you an example, we're working with students in Gaza. So our students asked those students there, they said, look, what is okay to ask you and not ask you? They did this in a live video conference, and the students in Gaza said, hey, look, you can ask us anything you want. We know what's safe to talk about and what's not, and we'll answer the questions the way we want. But what I tell students, and it's true with the Tibetans too in India, because even though Facebook may be, considered you can have a closed group. I tell them, whatever media you're using, you have to assume that potentially somebody can hack that, whether it be government or not. And it's usually government actors that we're usually the most worried about. But you just have to assume that potentially anything you put up there could be exposed, mm-hmm. and operate from that standpoint. I don't think I think it's hard to trust almost anything now. Mm-hmm. So, and LGBT, working with folks in Africa, we've had some issues like that too, and you just have to tell people you have to understand this. And so I give them a warning on both sides about it.
Okay, thank you.
One more idea just to throw in is if it is a country that allows Google and Gmail, our Canvas platform is open. Your course can be open to anyone with a Gmail account. So we could use, again, for that safety piece, Canvas does reside protected in a firewall on our own UW node. So that's a possibility too.
Great. That's good to know.
I think there may be a couple other people that aren't on the video, but and maybe their audio isn't working, but for those of you that are on and listening to this, if you're not up on the video, please feel free to enter any questions or comments into the chat box, and we'll try and pick those up. And thank you, Colleen, for watching that closely. Thanks.
Hey, Greg, can I ask a question, or do you want to continue and I'll ask it on the chat?
Nope, please do.
So this sounds very pedestrian. I'm brand new at this. Would it work something like this if I found an instructor, teacher in Vietnam, for example? I would get their contact information. I'd tell them what our thoughts are. If they agreed, I agreed. Then I would say, give me the emails of your kid, your students, and here are mine. I'll get them together. Or how does the very initial collaboration happen with the students after I hammer it out with, say, a professor at a university?
Right.
Good question.
Well, I'll tell you how I've done it. Because with all the groups so far, I've been able to use Facebook. We enter their names onto the closed Facebook group, and that usually happens by the two instructors we create a page, and then we'll send out invites to our students saying, hey, please join this group. Or they can go right to that site. We also give them the title of the site and say, go to this site and ask to join. And then the two teachers, the two faculty members are given administrative privileges when I set it up or when they set it up. Whoever sets it up can assign administrative privileges. So you have the two faculty members then approving everybody who then joins into it. So then they're all connected that way. If you can't use that, if you don't use Facebook, you have to use a similar procedure like in WeChat or something like that, where there has to be some sharing, like you say, of whatever the vehicle is, your WeChat address, your name that you use there, and then the faculty member collects that. And then if everybody isn't using that system, then you have to have some of the other students who use it. I usually then get them in groups and say, okay, those of you that know how to use WeChat, help these other students get on and get connected and create a page. So by end of the class, I've got a list of everybody's WeChat or theirs. I don't know if anybody else has done it differently, but that's how I do it. Any comments from anyone?
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that's getting started part. And then, you know, it's interesting. This becomes a learning process for the students. Like I've said, okay, now you guys are going to do in your global group, you need to do a Skype introduction and figure out what you're going to do and do the agenda. And then within 10 days, have a 20-minute conversation. So they do all the work, and then they realize they're getting ready to do the Skype meeting, and there hasn't been any exchange of which Skype address are we going to use, you know? And so they have to learn, oh, okay, well, that should have been one of the steps we took, was to exchange this way in which we can connect with each other. So there's a little bit of learning so that I sometimes will have students stumble through, and just depending on the group, you know, how much stumbling you want people to do and how much you want to prep them ahead of time to do it.
Hi, everyone. This is Natalia. I just wanted to add one thing. That one thing to be careful about or mindful of is to make sure that students on both sides have similar expectations for how this interaction will take place, and you may need to devote more time to this or not, depending on what other culture you're working with. So, for example, an instructor at a neighboring institution shared with us that while doing this kind of course with Japanese students, one problem they ran into is that the Japanese students weren't really clear about what they were supposed to do in interacting with their U.S. partners, but because it's culturally not as common to ask questions when you don't know things, they didn't ask questions until the next time the class met, or, you know, the teachers sort of got a sense that they weren't really doing what they thought they were going to be doing because they weren't sure how to proceed. And so they ended up losing a lot of the time they had set aside for collaboration just because there was unclear, you know, lack of clarity of what the students were supposed to do and how. And so maybe doing some testing or, you know, appointing a student leader, someone who's maybe more comfortable with the language or with technology, can be a strategy to avoid those issues.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, Natalia, because it relates to another issue about preparation, a couple issues about preparation, and then the dynamics between the two groups. These courses take a lot of time in the beginning because you're trying to work out the relationship between two classrooms, right? And you're doing it virtually, and oftentimes you haven't met that instructor in person. So you and that other faculty member are somewhat a microcosm of what's going to happen with your classroom too. How you work out problems with each other, how you think through some of these details, the power dynamics between the two of you. Those things are, I think, really good lessons to think about. And sometimes you can use those lessons in talking with the students about it, you know, thinking about, you know, who's the one that's presenting the idea to the other one? And then do you talk about that dynamic? Do you talk about the power difference and the expectations about, should it be, you know, is it the U.S. person continually suggesting we do this and, you know, the other international country not doing this? And that may be the case, but just talking about that dynamic can be useful. And then talking with your students some about that can be a good segue into, okay, so let's talk about expectations. You know, what's the expectation maybe of the Japanese students when they're working with us? What do we think? What are our initial assumptions going in, and what could be true and what isn't? So that whole thing about power dynamics and what you can learn from you and the instructor and planning ahead of time are really important things. And one thing I'm doing more of now, and I'm structuring into a couple of the courses I'm going to do this time, is give students a chance to practice doing something, not with their international partner first, but just with a breakup in the class where you have you take a global team and you pretend half your class is, you know, the Japanese and the half your class is here, and you have them plan a video conference and you have them have that experience of working together and who set the agenda and who did what and what roles were played and how did you make the connection. And that exercise, like I think Natalia you were referring to, those kind of exercises you can do ahead of time can be so helpful to them. Then when they go in, you know, when there's other dynamics operating, at least they've had this initial experience. Other comments, other suggestions, ideas, things you're thinking about? We've got about 15 more minutes, so I just want to just make sure we're using the time in the way you want. The two other things I'll say is I was thinking we could use, I have a couple more things to show you and to discuss. Mostly I want to refer you to some resources that have been put together by Natalia and others that could be useful to you, and then just do some more troubleshooting and talking about things you're dealing with. So, yeah.
I have a question. Is there any way to see a write-up, an example or two of maybe a project? I'm assuming that you write it down, you give it to your class, and then the collaborating. I would love to see what that might look like as an example.
Sure. That's a great idea. I'll take a sample curriculum from one of my courses and I'll put it up on my website. And I think, Natalia, aren't there a couple course examples that you have on the UW-Bothell website of course curriculum? I can't remember it. I thought I saw something.
We don't have any posted from our courses, but on the SUNY COIL website, there's a lot.
Okay.
There's a whole courses section, and that is linked to our course resource page. Okay. There's also a question from Dan about working with Chinese collaborators and the issue of Facebook not being permitted. So we've had a UW-Bothell professor work with a Chinese partner, and they used Weibo, I think is the Chinese equivalent of Facebook. So the our students adapted to what the Chinese students were familiar with.
Great.
Right.
Just really quickly, did you say SUNY COIL? What was that? Is it?
Yes, and I'll post a link in the chat in just a second.
Okay.
Yep.
Is in New York?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And I think at the end here, if there's time, I'm going to kind of walk you through 3 or 4 of those resources so you'll actually see it and see what's there. Yeah, good points. Any other?
Is there any way you could send that in an email to you're going to show us, or I can write it down and show it?
The course curriculum that I have?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll at the end of this, I'll have some resources that we'll send out to everybody, and I'll make sure that that's one of them. It'll be a document that you can look at.
Thanks so much.
It'll be a Word document.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, let's So just we may have hit on this, but if you're trying to do this, what do you think might be your biggest challenge, and what do you still want to know? And are there things that you disagree with so far? Those are sort of three questions. Just see if it triggers anything else that you have. Scott, you were talking about, getting started and, a very basic thing about just how do you do it logistically. Anything else in terms of challenges or disagreements?
Hey, I have a question. Do the collaborating partners sometimes have different agendas than you? Like, for instance, they just want to learn and practice English and you want to get a project going. Is that okay to have different agendas as long as you agree that everybody be working together?
They have to do my agenda. That's what I tell them.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's almost always the case. And that's what's really important to surface, because sometimes what I notice is, people are just so grateful for the idea of, oh, I can do a collaboration, and they're excited. They'll, and I find this, I've found this a number of times. They're excited to do it, and they will oftentimes just accommodate so much. I won't really know what it is that they want to get out of it. And so you have to spend a lot of time figuring out, well, really, what do you think your students care about here? What's going to make a difference? And then you take those two sets of goals and see, okay, what could work here? How could we get both these needs met? Because it's the student motivation that's got to be there. And if it's fueled by something that isn't at a deeper level, then the students will stop interacting. Because one of the things that's oftentimes different is, in all my classes, students are getting graded. They're getting graded for their performance as a group and as an individual, and so there's high stakes for them. And with most of the folks I've collaborated with so far, the students are not getting graded. There's sometimes a certificate, there's recognition, but they aren't necessarily getting a grade. So already there's a little bit of an imbalance. So you have to think about, how do we get this more balanced so the students are highly motivated on both sides. We have to talk about that. So yeah, it's really common, Scott. And it's absolutely okay, because I find all kinds of common ground.
Yeah, and I think that if you spend the time working with your co-instructor on talking about what the learning objectives are for your group versus their group, then you can still design activities and assignments that can help each side achieve their learning goals, but you have different objectives in that process, and then your students can be graded or assessed on different things. And that, like Greg is saying, that is very common.
I have a question. I'm interested in collaborating with universities in Sweden, and specifically Stockholm University, and what they're teaching on LGBT activism. Is there a list, or is there kind of international universities that already have this established? I don't reinventing the wheel. Is there already kind of centers or lists somewhere where we see that centers are working on this around the world?
And when you say working on this, you don't mean the content, you mean on doing COIL courses?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Natalia, you want to take that?
So one place you could look is there's an EU-based effort to promote these kinds of courses called Uni Collaboration, and I'm posting the link in the chat box as well. And there are institutions there that have profiles set up, and so you might find someone from Sweden and from Stockholm specifically. But I think that because this work is still pretty new, there often isn't much institutional visibility for real efforts. It happens more at the level of the individual faculty, or maybe initiative out of a global office or international office. So it can be a little bit difficult to find.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been working on with some of my counterparts at universities around the world is to bring more institutional infrastructure to support COIL work, but there's really just a handful of institutions that have that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. You don't want to reach out to one professor only to find that their colleague down the hall has fleshed out an entire course, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I want to, in the last few minutes we have here, just introduce you to, I mentioned there's a number of sites that are worth taking a look at here. On my website at, it's Tuke International Consulting.com, you'll see a number of resources. One thing is you can use, are you seeing this on your screen now? Do you see, does it come up? Anyone? I don't know.
No, I'm still seeing your PowerPoint.
Yeah, I see your PowerPoint.
Okay.
By the way, I was having some trouble getting my microphone to work earlier.
Yeah.
This is Karen Cogill.
Oh,
I
good.
had a question, and I know there are just a couple minutes left, but
Yeah.
I had asked earlier on the chat, and Colleen had addressed some issues about working with colleagues in Africa where internet connection is really poor, and also where it can be really expensive for students to have to get online. And she had some great ideas about having students connect sort of, you know, with asynchronous sharing of things. But I'm thinking more about delivery of course content and just wondering what kind of experience you've had with that. And then the other question I have is just, you mentioned a little bit like the imbalance in sizes, like you had a group of 8 and they had a group of 12 or something, but how big a group have you seen this work well with, or what do you think would be kind of a good size?
Well, I've done it.
Or maximum size.
Sure. I'll take your last question first. About size. My experience has been it's really hard when you start getting above 50 people in your classroom to be able to manage it. If you have 50 here and you have 50 there, it's pretty tough. So I think the max I've had has been 45 and 30 or something like that each side. You can have some differences. Your global teams will be a little bit skewed toward whatever side has more students than the other. But if you start getting above those numbers, I find it hard. Now, Natalia, maybe you can help me with this. Didn't she have 100 students in her class when she did hers?
So we had another instructor in the School of Nursing in Seattle, Yoon Jung Kim, who
that's right.
had about 150 students on each side, and actually collaborated with an institution in Swaziland in the southern part of Africa. And so they had a class of about 150 in Swaziland and 2 different classes that they pulled students from on the US side. And what they did is, and she had some TAs that she was working with, so she wasn't managing these large groups just by herself, but they ended up dividing everyone into groups, and the course was on life cycle development or human development, and so they divided the human life into stages and assigned students on both sides to groups that focus on just one stage, and their whole COIL project was to look at what are the most pressing issues to that stage of life in the United States and in Swaziland. And then their outcome of their collaboration was to produce a poster that addressed what is a stage in life, what are the issues on both sides, what are the factors that nursing students, right, because those were the professions they were both preparing to enter. What do nurses need to know, kind of on both sides? So it was a really large scale collaboration, but they made it more manageable by focusing it on more narrow projects, and they did not have large group interaction ever, because it wouldn't have been possible. The groups just worked independently and had some points when they had to check in, and they didn't do synchronous collaboration unless I guess the small groups decided to do that.
Okay.
And one of the, sorry, I'll add one other thing. One of the things that I think came up as a challenge is that it was more difficult to deal with some of the cross-cultural communication issues that came up. So they had one instance of language usage. One of the students in Swaziland called, in an online interaction, called one of the U.S. students babe. And that, caused the U.S. student to be really offended and think that was inappropriate. The student on the, in Swaziland didn't necessarily see it that way. And, some of it may have been just, he didn't understand the connotation of that term, right? He just wanted maybe to be nice and friendly, but it took a little bit of time for them to catch on that had happened, and then to address it and to spend, some time processing with the students what had happened and why it was interpreted this way or interpreted differently on both sides. So I think that if you do manage a large group, you and your collaborator have to be more proactive in anticipating some of the challenges that might happen, or build in, some maybe self-reporting from the small groups, or monitor online discussion to make sure that you're catching those issues before they become problems.
Yeah.
And Natalia, can I chime in that can happen in small groups and small courses?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's sort of the value, and the whole thing that COIL tries to do is say that cultures are different and language is different. And I know there was the wonderful example at the COIL conference you did of the Russian exchange, where they do not understand irony, so it's very careful that Americans don't use it. And that I do want to say as a part of this, that there's no one way to do COIL, right? I mean, that's the excitement, is to take your discipline and your pedagogy and your exchange and find tools and even just small assignments out of an entire course that allows for that interaction.
Yeah, good point. So unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time here. And Karen, I know we only got part of your question there about curriculum. As one short answer to that is, part of the thing with sharing curriculum, I think, is you figure out what parts of it are overlapping, and that's the part you do. You don't both have to implement the same curriculum on both sides. You figure out just the part, and then you develop that part together. But I know it's a more complex question that you asked than just that. Okay, well, thank you all for taking the time to do this. As I said, we'll send out to you some resources that you can use, and feel free to contact us. And it was great having you all on here. This was our first time using Zoom for one of these. So there were a couple of little hiccups, but I thought it worked pretty well, especially with a smaller group like this. So, okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you all later. We'll see you online.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.